the commentary. Awesome. All right, well, we'll get started as more people start to trickle in. So good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have a great discussion ahead of us. We have Ken Phelan, Gotham CTO, and Charles Blauner, President at Cyber Aegis. If you have any questions during the event, please feel free to put it in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself and ask. Oh, seems like we have a little bit of echoing going on. Also, if you haven't received your bagel box yet, you should be receiving it today or tomorrow. If you don't receive it, just let us know and we're good to go. All right, Ken, I will now turn it over to you.
Thanks, Phelan. Excellent. And thanks for putting us all together. And thanks for mailing all those bagels out to everybody. We definitely appreciate that. Although bagels probably aren't the best thing for me personally. But Charles, do you have your bagel? Are you ready?
I have my bagel. I'm ready. I'm making an exception at eating breakfast today.
Nice. So just a reminder for everybody, we are recording this. So just be aware of that and just keep your mics muted when you don't need to speak. But if you've got questions, feel free to chime in or ask them, or I think you can kind of chat to Shayla and she'll get us to as well. Charles and I are just going to talk about some of the things going on right now, what we see, and so that's usually helpful. Obviously, Charles has a fantastic background. I think one of the best backgrounds, certainly in the cybersecurity and the financial sector that I'm aware of. And you've been kind of helping us with some things, doing some subcontracting work. I know Gotham's looking to help you be some places, but maybe you can just give us a quick update on what you've been doing. I know I'm interested to hear about Cyber Aegis and how that's going. I see it's almost coming up on its 2-year anniversary. So what's new with you, Charles?
Yeah, so Ken, thanks. It's been an interesting journey since I retired from being an active CISO for, I guess, 25 years. I first got the CISO title at JP Morgan in '97. And so it's been an interesting journey the last 1.5, 2 years since I did retire. One of the key things for me, having been an operator for so long, was that I really felt it was more time in my life to take on more of a coaching role than an operator role. And one was because I didn't feel like there was anything really left to learn as an operator. And two, quite honestly, I was getting too old to go to sleep carrying my cell phone by my side. And so since then, what I've really focused on is Cyber Aegis. And it helped me sort of take this sort of love I had for sort of sharing what we were doing and educating and make it sort of the core of what I do every day. People who knew my old program at Citi knew how many of our clients and others we had come by to visit just to talk about cyber. And so what I do today with Cyber Aegis is really sort of focus on two kinds of things. I work with security companies, startups primarily, some more mature than others, helping them with their technical strategy, their go-to-market strategy, their positioning. And then I work with, let's say, more traditional clients, be they in the defense space and financial services or IT companies, where I fundamentally help the CISO or the CIO or the CEO on strategy. It's been fun. I had one client where I spent 2 months helping them redesign their cyber organization. I had another client where they just wanted to do an end-to-end review of their entire security strategy. But the way we did it was literally once a week, we got together for a day and we just talked about a topic. We talked about identity. We talked about fusion centers. We talked about boards. And so it's really been gratifying to help people sort of accelerate the security programs, avoid sort of challenges that over a long career I had to have, and now people can avoid mistakes that I made by just learning from that history. And so it's been a lot of fun. And working with the startups is also a ton of fun, both individually and through my association with Team 8. And so that keeps me busy. That and trying to learn to play golf, which is partially your fault, because the first time I ever played golf was at a Gotham event.
See, you're one of a growing number of golfers who I sort of talked them into playing, brought them to some Gotham events, and now play much better than me. So obviously, I'm like a Sherpa that only knows the way up the first 100 yards of the mountain. So I start people, I get them going because but no.
Well, you know what? In a sense, I'm a little bit of like a Sherpa too, but I hope to get them all the way to the top of the mountain on the cyber side. I mean, and that's actually part of where the Cyber Aegis name came from, because Aegis really means, the old words for it had to do with like when a king gave his protection to someone passing through his territory. And so it is the idea of imparting your protection on someone else. And so that's a little bit of what I'm trying to do with Cyber Aegis, help people get smart faster.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think there's a need just for better community, honestly, among cyber leaders. Like we work for different companies and it's a certain competitiveness, but I just think it's a very stressful job. I've heard you refer to yourself as a recovering CISO. Like you say, you're carrying your cell phone, you're doing stuff, but I think a lot of people, particularly new to the job or in smaller organizations, don't have the right support. It's really mentoring support. I don't say it's like it's therapeutic support, but it almost is, like the kind of support of what's happening, what you're being asked to sign, what you're being responsible for, and how you manage that against your technical background. I think is a tough conversation for a lot of new CISOs.
Yeah, it is. And I think you're right that there are times when some of my engagements feel more therapeutic than technical in nature. But a CISO's job is a hard job because you have to communicate at so many different levels, all right? And you have to be able to communicate with the CIO and the infrastructure folks, and you have to be able to understand things at a technical level. But if you only operate that way, you're very limited, because the truth is what you really have to do is be able to operate at the level of the business and the C-suite and the board of directors. And that's a whole different language, and it's a whole different way you have to manage that process. And I think for a lot of first-time CISOs, it's that part of it that's much more difficult. The technical aspects of their job, they grew up with one piece of it or another. But the first time you're in front of the board is the first time you're in front of the board. There's no on-the-job training for it. And so to help people understand how to communicate, what to communicate, it's easier if you've got a Sherpa.
Yeah. Well, I think on some levels it's gotten harder because I think the boards have seen cyber become more and more of an issue. There's been all this news about it, and you and I were talking the other day, and we just joked about the Monday morning emergency board meeting because 60 Minutes was on Sunday night, and all of a sudden the board's like, "What's going on with this?" Like, well, I've been telling you about ransomware for a long time, but okay, luckily it's now real. It's on 60 Minutes, but I mean, just, and I know it's a lot of advice you probably give people, but what do you talk to CISOs about? How do they create the concept that there's preparedness? There's always some amount of risk. There's, the money's being spent correctly. I mean, what are some of the foundational elements you kind of put into that board communication from your perspective?
Yeah, and so it is interesting with the board because the reality is if you think about the evolution of the CISO as profession, I mean, when I began, you talk to the board once a year, right? And it was 5 minutes. and you presented your security program to them, and they gave you their blessing, and off you went. And it was completely pomp and circumstance. The good and the bad is, because of all of that, today boards are much more aware and they care much more. The good of that is you actually now have the opportunity to really engage with the board. The bad of it is the board has expectations, and it's not always easy. I think the most important thing when you're trying to talk to the board is to introduce, if it's not already there, the frame of risk tolerance, right? What you want the board to understand is there are a whole bunch of risks to the business that stem from cyber as an underlying cause. Now, the truth is there are all sorts of other risks, and luckily there's someone else's problem to explain to the board, right? As a CISO, you only have to explain one subset of it. But you don't want to talk to the board in a black and white framework. You want to talk to the board. You want to introduce to the board this idea of risk tolerances. And these are around business risks. What is our tolerance for this business risk? There's a whole lot of underlying cyber crap underneath it, but the board doesn't care about that. They care about a business risk, an operational disruption, disclosure of customer data. How that happened to them is irrelevant. And so what you really want to do is introduce this concept of risk tolerance and basically say, and the basics of the story is, we can achieve zero risk, but the business will cease to function, all right? We can be completely laissez-faire and accept all risk, and the business will cease to function, all right? The truth of the discussion, the complexity of the discussion with the board is those two black and white options are intolerable either way. And so what you want to discuss with the board is, where on that spectrum does the board feel comfortable with you as a management team living, right? And that's hard because the knee-jerk reaction is to say, we have zero tolerance for everything. But now you've got back to this black and white world. You can't have zero tolerance for everything. There's some things you may want to have zero tolerance for. Like if you're a SaaS provider, you might want to have zero tolerance for unplanned operational outages, because you could be like Fastly or Cloudflare or any of the others who show up in the press because you had an oops and now 1,000 websites are down. That's something you want to have zero tolerance for. But I think that's the frame. The other hard part for a CISO, though, is a CISO's natural thought will be, let's have zero tolerance for late patches. Let's have zero tolerance for passwords not being vaulted. I'm making random stuff up now. That's not risk tolerance, right? That's a detailed metric. Okay, you want to have tolerances around business things. Okay, you want to have tolerances around how you think about customer data or operational integrity. Never talk to the board about patching, not unless there's a direct question.
Right. And that's that vocabulary gap's always hard too. Like there's phrases we use, things we talk about, technologies, being that interface line between technology and business, like being that person. you always have to watch yourself in your vocab and whatever, your acronyms, like all that stuff just is going to.
Oh yeah. Like, I mean, one of the first things I tell a new CISO is never use acronyms at all. All right. In any of your presentations, in any of the things that you speak about, because especially with boards, they're not of your language, and they also have short memories. So just because you maybe taught them an acronym at the last board meeting, the expectation that they remember the acronym at this board meeting that's too much to hope for.
Yeah.
And so no acronyms, no technical stuff, right?
Right.
The only boards that care about technical stuff happen to be the boards of technical companies, all right? So if you're on the board of Salesforce or Microsoft, they may care about technology stuff. Right. If you're on the board of a bank or a pharmaceutical company, they care about your business, which isn't technology.
Right.
It's not.
What's funny that you're saying, I know you said this go back to the Aegis experience. Now you're talking with different industries, and as a consultant, Gotham obviously deal with a lot of different industries. And it's funny insurance companies, large financials have very mature risk language and risk framework concepts that a lot of other industries may not have. The technology companies actually find very difficult because they're not cyber companies, but like they're developers of this, whatever. So they see themselves as adept technologists, but they're not always adept cyber people. So it's a different culture.
Let's be honest. Even cyber companies, they're just software companies. They happen to be making cyber products.
Right.
And the security of their products isn't perfect either. So
no. So since you're looking at all these new startups, let me just change gears a little bit here. And obviously there are a lot of problems that we're trying to address, and we can talk about some of the different problems, stuff like that. But like in your mind, like what's the new hot growth area? Like what if you were looking at? I know you look at a lot of different things. Like where are the holes, and what are startups moving to fill? Like if you and I are starting a company tomorrow, you'd be like, oh, let's do this.
So if I was starting a company tomorrow, I would focus on resiliency. Right. If you think about the framework about security, we always talk about protect, detect, recover, or respond, recover. And resiliency is a critical piece of how well you can recover. If you were to take a look at the density of venture companies and public companies around protect, detect, respond, there are a huge number of companies attacking each of those pieces. There's a much smaller number of people really focusing on resiliency. And if you think about the issue of the day and ransomware, it is, and let's think about ransomware and not talk about the dual threat where people are also blackmailing you by exposing data. Let's think about just the operational disruption piece of ransomware. That's fundamentally a resiliency issue, right? Your ability to recover rapidly from a ransomware attack is all about resiliency. And so I think that's a huge opportunity area. Interestingly enough, the reality is, I think some of the other areas of opportunities where you see a ton of work is all the old problems. Because let's be honest, if you think about the very beginning of information security, right? And I'm going back to the very beginning, there were really only two pieces to an information security program: identity access management and vulnerability management, right? That was true. I mean, you can go back to the 1980s when security was just beginning and I was just beginning in it. Those were the two things. And the reality is today's 2021, and we still don't do either one of them well.
Right.
All right. And so there's still a ton of startups thinking about how do I do a better job around vulnerability management. All right. And it's sort of the next version of orchestration. Okay. We've seen a whole SOAR market in the SOC space. You're now seeing a whole SOAR or orchestration market in the authentication space. You're seeing orchestration in vulnerability management. Companies like Vulcan and others. In the last year, I spoke to a dozen startups that were all about orchestrating vulnerability management. You have startups that are orchestrating secure software development. So that seems to be another sort of big theme, which makes sense because as a CISO, my most scarce resource was human beings, right? And so all of these orchestration plays are about how do you get more out of your people, right? And it's not about creating a new risk reduction capability. It's about how do you maintain that risk reduction capability with 80% reduction in required staff. Okay.
Right.
And the 80% is an exaggeration for effect, but all these orchestration plays really are not about creating new capabilities, but it's about how do you work smarter. And so I think that's the other sort of big theme, resiliency and working smarter, but working smarter across a lot of different areas.
I also hear customers talking about focus as a problem, that sort of this like predictive analytics concept that do the vulnerability management, give me all my vulnerabilities, but tell me which ones are really the important ones. Somehow use magic AI and all the things that are out there.
And that's where these orchestration companies come in.
Yeah, like they just it's like you say, there's just not enough man hours to fix all the stuff.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, but I also think I'll say something that may be a little bit controversial. I think this whole idea of prioritizing your vulnerabilities to pick this one or that one and roll it out to this server or that server, I think in the short run, it feels good to do that. But I think it's a massive mistake. I think companies would be much better off that instead of trying to create these really complex processes for how they pick and choose, that they start to think of their environment like a bridge, all right? And painting a bridge. Where like literally you start painting on one side, get to the other side, finish painting, and you go back again. And if you think about more of a continuous refresh cycle, this whole idea of patch this, patch that becomes less of an issue, right? If you're going to touch a server to apply a patch, you need a green zone. Why would you choose to only apply these 3 patches today when you've got 18 other patches, all right? 15 others may not be as high a risk, but if you've got the green zone, just get the machine current.
Right.
All right. And so I think it's sort of cool to say we're being risk-based, and I'm a very risk-oriented person. But I think you also have to think about the risk that complexity introduces. And I think there's a simplicity to say, I'm going to patch every desktop every month, no matter what. All right. And so a desktop is never going to be more than 28 days out of date.
Right.
All right. That would get you a lot farther than saying, I'm going to make sure all my critical things are patched in 2 weeks and all my less critical things are patched whenever I can get to them. All right.
It seems easier to automate. It seems like a more rational process the way you're describing it than to automate these things. I mean,
yeah, and on the desktop it's easy. Where it gets more difficult as you get closer to the application. So desktops are easy. Servers are not that hard. But then when you get into things like middleware and application frameworks that need patching, I mean, patching struts is just like a not fun thing.
Right. No, on that level, it's not fun. I mean, one of the things I wanted to bring up with you, I mean, you've like, as you mentioned, you're CISO for JP Morgan, for Citi, for large organizations, but now you're dealing with smaller organizations, like some of these cyber companies, some of these things, like and people always assume, I think, so most of the customers we deal with are smaller than Citibank, oddly, that you guys had everything. You had every risk you could ever want. You have red teams. You got people all over the globe. Hundreds and hundreds of staff in the cyber org. But and obviously I know you did have everything you ever wanted. But these smaller people, like they're dealing with a lot of the same problems, right? Just on different scales. Smaller banks, smaller financial organizations. I mean, how do you scale the huge need for quality cyber organization into these smaller places that you're now mentoring?
It's difficult. I mean, the reality is that's where consultancies and managed service providers come in. I mean, when I was at Citi, I would never have considered outsourcing my SOC, okay? But in 95% of the companies in the world, I couldn't ever consider building my own, all right? I was talking to a client a couple of days ago, and they're building a security team. They're going to hire a CISO, and they're going to hire 8 people. Okay. Now, like when I was at Citi, I had 2,400-ish people. And they're going to build a security team from scratch, hire a CISO and 8 people. And they asked me, what should those 8 jobs be? And I told them what the 8 jobs should be. Like if you only have 8 positions, these are what those 8 jobs are. And you sort of make it work for what you've got. And yeah, they are going to have to rely on managed service providers to do 95% of their operations. And that's appropriate. They're not going to be able to hire their skills, all right? So it's really going to be more for them around governance and strategy, all right? And incident response. Those are the 3 things I told them they needed: incident response, governance, and strategy. And then you need good service providers to provide the actual execution. And this is a company that's about 400, 500 people, and real customers, real risks, but real legitimate limitations. I mean, you can't, if you've got a whole company that's a couple of hundred people, you're not going to build a massive security program. It's not possible. Right. It's insane. So.
Yeah, I think it's a bit like you said that point before about the things that are hard, the things that are easy, the things that are, doing desktops, doing firewall rules. Those are sort of, as you get closer and closer to the business, closer and closer to the applications, you need individual expertise that only your company can have. And your cyber team is going to have to understand that those elements. We certainly have seen a lot of our managed services have been growing, selling managed SOC services very well. So our consultancy stuff, but we're going to sell more Aegis next quarter too, so it's going to be perfect. So we'll get my things going there. But yeah, I think it's challenging for these smaller guys because again, the perspective of the board is if I give you 8 headcount, if I hire a brand new CISO and give you 8 headcount, that's a lot of money. To your point, in a 400 person company, this seems like a big allocation, but it's really not. You're going to have to do a lot of managed services to kind of fulfill the thing.
Yeah. And the truth is, like, if the board thinks that 8 people is the total expense profile, you're going to have a challenge, right? Because the expense profile is primarily going to be third parties. But it's a variable cost. And the reality is, especially if you think about the growing downside of not doing it, it becomes really difficult for you not to have just some basics in place. But I mean, I don't know if this statistic is still accurate, but someone showed me a report a couple of months ago, and it was looking at the Fortune 1000. All right. 14% of the Fortune 1000 companies did not have named CISO. And you're talking about the 1,000 biggest companies. Right. You're not talking about the tens of thousands of small and mid-sized enterprises in the world. And the truth is, like, I'm seeing CISOs pop up in so many places. I mean, fintechs especially are gobbling up CISOs at a much earlier stage than startups used to, because especially for fintechs, I think it's become a very rapid realization that this is a make or break topic for them as a fintech. And so there are a lot of fintechs that are very young, small companies that are bringing on a security leader earlier than you would have seen historically.
Yeah, but I mean, that's hopefully keeping the horse in the barn, right? I mean, that, like, some of these people,
it's the right thing to do. I mean, one of the things I'm lucky to do is there's a thing called the Partnership for New York City. It's this big endowment to drive the economic development of New York City. They have a fintech innovation lab, and I'm one of the executives in residence there. They have a regulator, a bunch of senior folks that are executives in residence, and I'm the CISO in residence at the fintech innovation lab. And the amount of questions, amount of energy from these startups that are not security startups, right? They're in insurance tech, they're in credit risk, they're in all these other spaces. The amount of energy I had in my office hours was amazing. And these are very young companies who are getting that from the very beginning or early stages. It's a topic that they need to take seriously.
Yeah.
So
no, it's definitely good. I mean, sometimes I think, I mean, I've been doing this for a little while myself too, and it just seems to get worse and worse and escalate. At some point, you're like, what's the solution for this? I mean, sometimes I just like have this fantasy the government's going to do something positive, but because I mean, like in theory, if like I have this theory, like, well, you know, if roving bands of bandits were coming over the border from Canada, stealing stuff from the U.S., the government wouldn't have a program requiring everybody in the northern part of the country to buy guns. Like, hopefully there'd be some other thing that they did to help people. Like, you know, like what, like, does this just get worse? And I think I'm sure you saw the new executive order. I mean, those kinds of things don't necessarily change. Like, the government telling us to do more things to defend ourselves, I get, but, you know, at what point does this, how does a small company or even Citibank defend themselves against, you know, nation state hackers? It's the resources just out of, right. So where does this end up?
I honestly don't know where it ends up. The reality today is the balances are all wrong. Okay, and so the risk reward balance is bad. So I used to have this joke when I used to talk in front of audience when I was still a CISO, and I would joke about the fact that in a lot of ways my job was the worst job in the world. If I got it right 1,000 out of 1,000 times, I played to a draw. If I got it wrong once out of 1,000 times, I lost. The only way to win was to retire of your own choice. So I guess I've won. But what I was trying to sort of point out was there is this imbalance in the equation of risk reward, right? The bad guys put up relatively small amounts of money, get very large rewards with very low risk. The good guys put up huge amounts of money with very little reward and still have very high risk. So the equation is all out of balance. And I don't think anything changes until the bad guys start actually having risk. Okay. And that means until the global legal framework in this space changes or evolves, so that you don't have countries sheltering criminal entities. If you don't solve that problem, the problem doesn't go away. All right.
Yep.
You can't make a perfectly defensible environment. So there are always going to be weaknesses that can be exploited. All right. And so I don't think the situation changes until you change that equation. And the only real variable that we can control is increasing risk to the bad guys.
Right.
I mean, I had someone joke that the best way to end ransomware is a drone strike. That's most probably a little extreme. I'm not sure the death penalty is warranted for ransomware, but the idea that there has to be the potential for real consequence, until that's there, we're living with what we've got. And it's just always going to be a game of cat and mouse, which is why security is so hard. Because it's just a never ending challenge. But that's also why it's so great.
That's right. That's why we all enjoy being busy all the time. I saw a question from the audience come up about zero trust. I know I blogged a little bit about zero trust being a big part of the EO and their definition being a lot clearer. Because I think we're getting a little muddied as an industry. I think everybody was telling, like, I'm an endpoint company and you shouldn't trust endpoints. That's zero trust. I'm like whatever they were saying, like just don't trust anything. That's what zero trust means. But I think there's the definition I'm sure you've seen in the EO. Do you think it helps? Do you think it's achievable? I mean, is that something we can work towards?
So does it help? Yes, zero trust at its theoretical purest absolutely helps, because what zero trust really is trust nothing. All right. I mean, or authenticate and validate everything. So that's not bad. The practical reality of being able to do that at scale, time will tell. All right. I talked earlier about vulnerability and access management as being sort of two problems we've had from the very beginning, and we're still not very good at it. Crypto key management is another one. That's been a long-term problem that we're not very good at. And zero trust is all about massive crypto key management, because everything has got a key, and everything is cryptographically signed and validated, etc. So the theory is good. I think the practical reality of it is going to vary, and there are going to be places where I think it's going to more easily be adopted as an underlying architecture. I think like the network edge is a great example of that. The whole idea of moving away from VPNs, moving away from backhauling traffic through your networks to what today is SASE and what I think the next generation beyond SASE, which is just pure end to point over the top networks. I think at the edge, that's a perfect place for zero trust. And it's the place where I think I've observed the most activity. Cloud application development is another place where zero trust can be done, but I don't see as much of it. And then zero trust inside legacy networks. Good luck with that. It's a nice idea. I honestly think you're much better off inside legacy networks thinking about segmentation than you are about zero trust. It will be something that will be much easier to achieve, won't have as much of a benefit as pure zero trust, but it'll have a lot of the benefit without anywhere near the complexity. And network segmentation is not simple, but trying to do zero trust inside of an existing networks is way harder.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of customers really struggle with microsegmentation. And we were talking about, again, we're getting at the core of it, we're talking about stopping lateral movement. And I think, there's a lot of other things you could do, like primarily like around Microsoft and that kind of motion. So it's like putting all your energy into microsegmentation when
we don't have to do microsegmentation. Okay.
Yeah.
So you can, when we started to think about segmentation, a lot of it came, at least for the banks, when we start to think about the SWIFT requirements, right? And banks like Citi and most of the other banks did segmentation to protect their SWIFT infrastructures. There are some financial firms that actually went to the level of doing microsegmentation for all their key business processes, all right? And that's really difficult, all right? But doing microsegmentation for your 2 or 3 most critical business processes, and then doing, let's say, macro segmentation for the rest of your environment could still have huge benefits, all right? The idea of saying that you're going to segment desktops so desktops can't see servers other than through a browser session would have huge benefits, right? Especially in things like ransomware spread, segmentation between production and development environments can have benefits. Segmentation on geographic levels can have benefits. So you can do segmentation that helps you minimize the blast radius of a bad day without it having to be microsegmentation, okay? And so the initial strategy was segment at a business process level, really difficult to do. So you do that only for a handful of really critical things, but you can still get a lot of benefit by doing segmentation, but at a more macro level, all right? And then the other thing is lateral movement detection. The reality is you need to think, today there are a lot of tools in lateral movement space, in the XDR space that are ML based, AI based, statistically based. Those are good. I don't think they're sufficient. I think you also need to add into that lateral movement detection capabilities that are deterministically based. And so you need to think about, if I'm thinking about protecting the inside of a legacy network, I'm thinking about the lateral movement detection, and I'm thinking about segmentation well before I'm thinking about zero trust.
Yeah, I guess we have had this conversation with some other people in a similar things like the Microsoft problem is just so huge. Like Active Directory is such a problem, right? It's escalation within Active Directory. Active Directory's span of control in organizations is so immense, you know, that like looking at that as a, not to say that segmentation can't help, but that if you, once you lose the AD, you know, you've lost, and it's not that hard to lose the AD.
But that's also a place where things like segmentation can help. All right. So like you can actually create a red forest as sort of a trusted center and use segmentation to control access to it in ways that will make it more robust. And yes, AD is going to be a challenge because it's the core to everything for everyone today, for the most part. But there are things you can do to harden it. And again, there are things you can do around blast radius, right? If you take a look, like a lot of large organizations for desktop support will have the view of the entire world as one zone, right? So all your tools have a blast radius of blow up the whole company, all right? You don't need that, okay? You can still be efficient and carve up the world into chunks to limit blast radius, all right? You're not eliminating a ransomware problem as an example, but if you have a ransomware event, it takes out one office, not a company, or it takes out one data center, not a company. And so, yeah, there are a bunch of options there.
Awesome. Do you feel like the deception technologies help here? Like,
I do. I think deception technologies are part of the puzzle. That's that deterministic piece, right? I was talking to a CISO of a very, very large company in the consumer packaged good world, right? And this CISO basically said, with all of our factory floors and the like, all of our processing, our ability to patch and stay current is fundamentally zero. So while I try to do the best I can at patching, I've given up on being good at it. And so they took the approach of deceptions, and they've got, I think, like 8 million deceptions deployed in their environment. And they haven't failed a pen test since they went that way. Now, you would think with all your vulnerabilities sitting around exposed, failing a pen test would be easy, but the deceptions were a counterbalance. The bad guys got in, but were rapidly detected. And quite honestly, to me, that's a success, okay? If it's, and I want to go back to one of the things you asked about earlier, the board. Anyone who tells the board that they can prevent bad things from happening should be shot. All right. What you have to tell your board is, we're going to do everything we can to protect this firm. We are going to manage within the risk tolerances that you, the board, approve. But no matter what we do, you have to expect that a bad day is going to happen. A bad guy is going to target us. A bad guy is going to be successful. Any other expectation other than that is a false hope. And so what I said was, what you should measure my success on is not did the bad guy get in, but how fast did I catch him and how effective was my response. All right. Speed of detection, effectiveness of the response. That's how you're going to measure success, because the bad guy's going to get in. And so that's what you tell the board, but that's also how you have to think about the architecture of your detection fabric. And that's why the CISO basically said, I'm giving up on parts of protect. And so I'm just making a huge bet on detect.
Yeah, I know lots of people with those technologies who are very, very happy with them. So, you know, it's high signal to noise ratio. You know, you're seeing bad actors, you're doing that kind of stuff. But one of the challenges, I think, just for people in terms of budgeting is it's not a required technology. You know, on the audit pack, I got to have firewalls. I got to have this. It's not a got to have. And
yeah, and the thing is, so I think part of the challenge there is, and I'll say I was probably unintentionally contributed to this back in 2014 when I first started to see deception technologies. I love the idea of deception technologies, and so I got very focused on it. The truth is, it was probably misjustice to describe them that way. They really are just a class of detection technologies, right? And so, yes, the regulators require you to have intrusion detection systems in your environment. They don't specify the class of technology. But what I would say is you want to have a mix of statistical, ML-based IDS systems, and you want to have a set of deterministic IDS systems that complement each other, right? And so you shouldn't think of these as two different things. They are one thing that you are using two different approaches to make sure you've got as complete a picture as possible, right? So I don't think of deception as separate. I think of deception as the deterministic component of a detection strategy that you want to mix in with your AI and ML statistical based components.
Awesome. No, that's a great point. All right, we'll come up on the top of the hour, and I really appreciate your time today, Charles. I got a lot of good comments from people. I don't know if you have any final parting thoughts or things you want to, share with us, but.
No, I mean, the only thing I would say is sessions like this are great because the bad guys are really good at helping each other. And so the more good guys are good at helping each other, the better off we all are. So I'm a big believer in community. And so I would just tell people, get involved in as many communities as you can. You may not necessarily see the benefit day one, but you will absolutely get the benefit in the long run.
Great. Awesome. Well, thanks, Charles. Thanks for your time this morning. Thanks, everybody, for joining.
My pleasure.
Hope you appreciate the bagels, and we'll look to have more chats like this in the future. If you want to reach out, if you have any additional questions, you can come through Gotham, come through your reps, talk to Phelan, and we'll forward them along and get you in contact. All right, Charles, have a great day. Thanks for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks. Bye, everyone. Enjoy your bagels.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Ken.